So in this latest video looking at fractions, we'll be focusing on division. Now before we get started on this, it's really important that we before being able to divide fractions or division questions involving fractions, it is vital you fully understand how to multiply with fractions involved. Now if you're not too sure on how to multiply with fractions, I strongly recommend you watch the previous video focusing on fractions and multiplying before we proceed. So once you are happy with fractions and multiplying, let's have a look at division. So just like with multiplying, there is a set method on how to divide with fractions. So first we need to make sure that each fraction is proper or improper, so in other words it's not a mixed number, and then we need to ensure that the question involves a division symbol, and then we just need to follow these three simple steps. Now if you're not too sure about what we mean by a question involves a division symbol, we'll lead on to an example where we have to focus on just that. So the first step we need to do is flip the second fraction. And a common question is always asked to me, is it always the second fraction? Yes, it's always the second fraction. So it's never the first, always the second fraction that you flip. And what we mean by flipping is you just reverse the top number with the bottom number, and the bottom number then becomes the top number. Now the second step is you replace the division symbol with a multiplying symbol instead. And then the final step is we then multiply the two things together. And if you're not sure again about how to multiply fractions, I strongly recommend you watch a previous video. Now in terms of your notes, one thing that I would strongly recommend that you do is to highlight this in terms of algebra. Now if you're not too great with algebra, it's not a problem. All this is basically doing is, if I just finished creating this bubble, your question would look something like this, in which A, B, C and D were going to be numbers, and then just following the three simple steps it then becomes this, in which what we've done here was we've flipped the C and D over and made them swap places, and we've also then replaced the division symbol with a times. And then if you go back in terms of the method of multiplying fractions together, all we're doing is multiply the top two numerators together and have that over the multiplication of the bottom two numbers, or the two denominators, divided times together. And then we then go on to work that out and simplify where possible, just like we would with a normal multiplying question. So that's enough of me talking. Let's have a look at applying this to some examples. So to start off with, let's have a look at this, and we can notice that there are some numbers missing, so let's just have that there. So in terms of question 1, so the first thing you want to do to make your life a little bit easier, just like with multiplying, is always check to see if you can simplify fractions. Now the problem with division, and I've got to stress this to you, is you can only simplify single fractions together. So if you've watched the previous video on multiplying, where we could simplify and look at the numerator from the other fraction and simplify that with a denominator from another fraction, with this you cannot do it. You've got to see these fractions as standalone fractions. So if I just highlight it there, I can only simplify the numbers in the fraction by its direct denominator or numerator respectively. So once we've got that sorted and we've checked to see if we can divide it, to simplify it rather, so first things first, we're going to follow the steps. So the first fraction stays the same, and then we flip the second fraction, so it becomes 6 over 5, and then we replace the division symbol with times. And then what we then need to do is multiply the two numerators together, so we get 12, multiply the two denominators together, in which we get 15, and then there is our answer. But we always want to check to see, can we simplify it? Yes, we can. So we can simplify by dividing both numbers by 3. So how many 3 is going to 12? That would be 4. How many 3 is going to 15? That would be 5. And there is our final answer. Now if you've watched the previous video on multiplying, then one thing you might want to do at this particular stage is see if you can simplify it before you actually multiply. So if I just write out the question again, so here we can see I can simplify the 6 and the 3. So I can divide both those numbers by 3, in which we get 1, and that then becomes a 2. And then we do 2 times 2, which is 4, and 1 times 5, which is 5, and we get to the answer straight away. Now if you're not too keen on simplifying first, again, that's not a problem. Just make sure you do always check to see if you can simplify the final answer. So again, with number 2, we're going to do 4 over 5 divided by 3/10. Now again, you might think to yourself, oh, I can simplify 4 and 10, but in this case you can't, because they're both separate fractions. So you can't, like we did with multiplying, you can't do that with this one. So what we now need to do is follow the 3 steps. So the first thing I'm going to do is write down the first fraction, and then I flip the second fraction and replace the division symbol with a times. So now if you wanted to, you could simplify, so we cancel out the 10 and the 5, or we could just go straight into multiplying, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So 4 times 10 is 40, 5 times 3 is 15, and this then becomes an improper fraction, or top-heavy fractions, but again we're going to simplify it first. So I'm going to divide both numbers by 5, so I get 8 over 3, which then becomes, we can write this as now as a mixed number. So how many 3's go into 8? That would be 2, with a remainder of 2, and so the answer then is 2 and 2/3. So if we then move on to question 3, in which we've got 8 over 9 divided by 12 over 15. Now here, the first thing I notice is I can simplify 12 over 15. I can simplify this fraction. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So first of all, I'm going to change that for a 4, because I'm going to divide both numbers by 3. By 3. So I get 4 over 5. So I'm going to change, rather than writing 12 over 15, I'm going to write 4 over 5 instead. Now if you chose not to do that, it's not a problem, but again it just makes your life a little bit easier when it comes to simplifying at the end. So here I've got 8 over 9. I'm going to flip the fraction of 4 over 5, so it becomes 5 over 4, and then that then becomes a times. So multiplying 8 times 5 is 40, 9 times 4 is 36, and then I can then go on to simplify if I can. So I can divide both numbers by 4, so I get 10 over 9, and then I can write that as a mixed number if I wanted to, because it's an improper fraction, so it becomes 1 and 1/9, and there is your final answer for that one. Now finally with question 4, now depending on what level you're working at, you might find you get a question that looks like this. Now if you've got any knowledge of algebra, one of the rules of algebra is we don't use a division symbol. Instead what we do is we write things as a fraction. So if you have got something written as a fraction, this basically means the same as divide. So question 4 is basically 3/5 divided by 2/7. And then we go through the steps again, check to see if it simplifies. No, it doesn't, so I'm going to leave it as it is. So I write down the first fraction, flip the second fraction, and it turns to a times, and then 3 times 7, which is 21, 5 times 2, which is 10, and then we can then write this as a mixed number, which then becomes 2 and 1/10, and there is your final answer. Now one thing you will find when you're dealing with division is that more often than not your final answer will be an improper fraction, so you always want to check, do you have to write as a mixed number? Will I lose any marks if I don't write as a mixed number? You go from there. Now typically speaking, if a question wants you to write its answer as a mixed number, if it proves to be an improper fraction, it will usually tell you, but again it's good practice if you just do it anyway. But again, if you get it wrong, you're going to lose a mark for it. So let's have a look at a different division question. So this time let's have a look at when we're dividing a fraction by a whole number, or a whole number divided by a fraction. Now the good thing about this is it's the exact same technique of what you do when you're multiplying a fraction by a whole number. So the first thing we want to do is, when you have got a whole number, is you can convert it into a fraction by having it over 1. So I'm going to do it for both 1 and 2 already. So question 1, 2/3 divided by 5 is the same as 2/3 divided by 5 over 1. And then again, write the fraction as it is, flip the second fraction and turn it into a times. So 2 times 1 is 2, 3 times 5 is 15. Always check to see if it simplifies. No, it doesn't, so that there is my final answer. With question 2 again, so 7 divided by 3/10 is the same as 7 over 1 divided by 3 over 10. So again, first fraction stays the same, second fraction we flip and it turns to a times. So I've got 7 times 10, which is 70, divided by 3, and then I want to then convert that into a mixed number, in which what I get is, and bear with me, so we're going to get 33 and 1/3, and there is our final answer. So moving on from that, let's have a look at division involving mixed numbers. Now again, without quoting too much and plugging my previous video on multiplying with fractions, the first thing you want to do is whenever you're doing any calculations involving mixed numbers, you always want to convert them to improper fractions. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to change, or convert I should say, these fractions into improper fractions. So 4.5, and again, if you're not sure about how to convert improper to mixed numbers and vice versa, I recommend you watch my previous video. So here we've got 4 times, so it's going to be over 2 because the denominator always stays the same. We've got the big number times the bottom number, which is 8, plus 1, which is 9, and then we've got divided by, and if I then look at 3 1/3, so that's going to be over 3. So I've got 3 times 3, which is 9, plus 1, which is 10. So that then gives me the same answer. Then I can apply the 3 steps. So flip the second fraction, and it turns to a times, and then 9 times 3, which is 27, over 20, and written as a mixed number, how many 20s go into 27? That'd be 1, remainder 7, with the original denominator as 20. And then obviously with number 2, now number 2 we don't need to do anything with the first fraction because that is fine. It's this second fraction that we need to work with. So 3 3/4 is the same as 3 times 4, which is 12, plus 3, which is 15, so it's 15 over 4. So another way of writing this question is 2 over 5 divided by 15 over 4. So again, applying the 3 steps, I flip the second fraction, so it becomes 4 over 15, convert it to a times. I then got 2 times 4, which is 8, and 5 times 15, which is going to be 75. And does that simplify? No, it doesn't. So there is our final answer. Now if you're wanting any practice of any of these 3 aspects, there'll be a worksheet attached in the description below.